Madam President, we support Algeria's initiative to hold this Emergency Security Council meeting to discuss the unbearable humanitarian situation in the north of the Gaza Strip. We'd like to thank the acting head of OCHA, Joyce Msoya, for her overview of the human tragedy unfolding before our very eyes. Given that for over 12 months we've seen incessant bombing by Israel's Air Force, the humanitarian situation in the enclave is truly horrific. The number of people killed, wounded, and maimed, these civilians, including women and children, is staggering. In the last 24 hours alone, 55 Palestinians were killed. Over 229 were wounded. The scale of starvation is shocking. Gaza's entire population is in need of emergency food aid. Mass displacement and evacuation orders have become mundane, although there is basically nowhere left to flee. In different parts of the Strip, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps are being shelled. The US media is quoting volunteer doctors working in Gazan hospitals. According to their witness accounts, practically daily, they're seeing cases of gunshot wounds to the heads among minors between the ages of 2 and 12. It would appear then that the UN flag is not only failing to protect the civilian population, humanitarian workers, and civilian social infrastructure, but this flag is also seemingly becoming a direct target for the IDF. All humanitarian workers, including today's briefer, are stating in unison that there is nowhere in Gaza that's safe. This is not a figure of speech, it's a bitter reality. Madam President, for 2 weeks now, the international community has looked on as the Israeli military has conducted intensive airstrikes and a military ground operation in the northern Gaza Strip. We're receiving reports about hundreds of Palestinians killed, including children. Just a few days ago, on the 13th of October, yet another outrageous airstrike was conducted by the Israeli Air Force on schools in the Nuseirat refugee camp. As a result, a minimum of 22 people died, including 15 children and women. 80 people received wounds to varying degrees of severity. Another 5 minors became victims of an airstrike on the Al-Shati camp in the north of the enclave. The IDP has been conducting a military operation, a siege of the Jabalia camp, for over a week now. As a result of bombing, undernourishment, and thirst, hundreds of thousands of people could die. And yet the only bakery in the city of Jabalia was destructed by yet another Israeli airstrike. Over 400,000 people saw themselves cut off by the Israeli military, cut off from food and medical aid. And this at a time when the WFP is not delivering foodstuffs to the northern Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, food distribution centers were shut owing to the intensification of hostilities. Unfortunately, this is in keeping with media reports about Israel implementing a so-called general's plan of the IDF. That's a humanitarian blockade and squeezing people out from these territories. That's the plan. We really hope that this chilling information will not be corroborated. In this context, we echo the words of the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Mr. Letzerini. He called on Israel to exhibit humanity and courage, underscoring that people in the northern Gaza Strip are facing a choice, fleeing their homes or dying of starvation. Madam President, the socioeconomic damage being done to the Strip that has been done over the last year is colossal. According to UN estimates and figures, the enclave's GDP dropped so far that recovery to pre-crisis levels will take almost 70 years. Reconstruction of critical infrastructure will require a minimum of 80 years. These calculations take as their base the start of 2024, although the mass destruction is continuing day in, day out. Unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians under prevailing conditions is of utmost importance. And yet here again, we're seeing serious problems. Israel is introducing restrictions. Meanwhile, humanitarian workers are themselves being shelled and detained on a regular basis. In total, over 300 humanitarian workers have been killed, making 2023 the deadliest in history for humanitarian workers. The UN is ringing alarm bells. 2024 could break a new deadly record in this respect. Hence, what does not withstand any criticism are the Knesset bills aiming to ban UNRWA work activities on Israeli territory and to revoke the immunities and privileges of UNRWA personnel. Let me remind you that the agency is the backbone of the UN's humanitarian wing in Palestine. It has unparalleled social, educational, and medical service provision capabilities. If the bills were adopted, they'd threaten not only the lives of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, but also dim the prospects of assisting Palestinian refugees in neighboring Arab countries, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. On top of the precipitously deteriorating situation in the OPT and the financial crisis prompted by the US withdrawing donor support to UNRWA, the above risks definitively spelling the end of the agency's activities. It appears that that is exactly what Israel is trying to achieve. Despite all of the above, Washington, without any regard to the community, is continuing to pump its Middle Eastern ally full of weapons. At the same time, the US is providing political cover and blocking any Security Council attempts to end Israel's ruthless military machine responsible for numerous crimes against the Palestinian people. Madam President, such unilateral and unpunished actions taken to create irreversible facts on the ground are a flagrant violation of Israel's obligations as an occupying power, stemming from the Geneva Conventions, which were adopted 75 years ago. Ironically, the conventions were adopted to a large extent to protect the Jewish people, which were subjected to inhuman suffering during World War II, and also adopted to avert any future prosecution based on nationality as well. Israel, without a doubt, has the right to ensure its security. However, the path to such security undoubtedly lies solely via a comprehensive Middle East settlement process and by remedying the historical injustice visited upon the Palestinian people by establishing an independent Palestinian state as per relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. We've been convinced time and again that any other unilateral formula geared towards achieving a truce between Israel and its neighbors without a just solution of the Palestinian question won't help achieve the aforementioned goal. All such schemes will do is prompt outbreaks of violence like the one underway in the region right now. Madam President, we've stated many times that we stand against violence and terrorism in all of its manifestations. We stand attacks on civilians anywhere, in any country. This also applies to the attack on peaceable Israelis on 7th October 2023, which we immediately and unequivocally condemned. Nothing justifies such actions. Just like there's nothing that can justify what's underway in Gaza, a collective punishment and the total annihilation of the civilian population. We stand convinced that the current catastrophic situation can and should be settled solely through political and diplomatic ways. To this end, we need to ensure the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions, to immediately stop the bloodshed in the region, and, what's most important, to guarantee the implementation of the lawful right of Palestinians to their own state based on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We must act without delay. We must compel the parties to the conflict to an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, coupled with an exchange of hostages and detainees and a full and unfettered humanitarian access to the Strip. This will not only help restart the process of peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question using the two states for two people formula, which we've all unswervingly supported, but it will also help to de-escalate tensions throughout the Middle East. Regrettably, the Resolution 2735, adopted in June at the insistence of our US colleagues, cannot achieve a ceasefire because it hinges on the outcome of a somewhat dubious negotiation process which isn't actually underway at present. We'd like to believe that Washington will at last recognize this obvious fact and will stop sabotaging relevant Security Council initiatives in future. We stand ready to support any such initiatives. I'd like to remind you that the Security Council has levers and necessary and time-tested toolkits to tackle these tasks. We're all very familiar with such toolkits. All we need to do is to muster the political will to finally set aside narrow geopolitical interests and to clearly and unambiguously demand an immediate ceasefire. We see that all Security Council members, bar one, are ready to do so. We don't understand why the remaining members of the Security Council have to share responsibility for the madness underway in Gaza, if it is only one member that's stopping us from ending this madness. So we'd like to ask all those who will be taking the floor after we do not to limit themselves to general appeals to the Security Council, but to personalise their reproaches, addressing it to the state which is personally responsible. I thank you.